we're going to look at how the 4 conversational maxims influence our interactions with other people. These were first articulated by Paul Grice. And this video is mostly going to be educational, but I'll try to create some basic concrete tips for each of the 4 maxims. A maxim is just an unspoken principle or rule of conversation. And when a conversation is going well or as expected, you'll hardly notice that these are in effect. The conversation will feel natural. But we're not born with these. We learn them and we pick them up through experience. And ideally, both people in a conversation would cooperate in following these principles to communicate effectively. You can usually tell that something's gone a little wrong when somebody in the conversation doesn't follow these norms. If people aren't following these principles, then the conversation can start to feel off, demanding, confusing, dissatisfying, and that increases the work that's required to manage the conversational difficulty and get things back on track, if possible. If you struggle day to day with conversations, then use these 4 maxims as a checklist for self-assessment. My hope is that by becoming more aware of how these maxims work, you can become a better conversationalist over time. The first maxim is quantity. Simply put, this means to be informative, but it requires a balance. Being informative means that the communicator should give the right amount or expected amount of information in a conversation, but not too little or not too much. The classic example of too little information is when a teenager asks his mom or dad to borrow the car, but they're not providing enough information for the request.
Can I borrow the car?
Well, where are you going? They answer,
Out.
who are you going out with?
Friends.
Well, when will you be home?
Later.
Those answers don't give very much information. And if this were my son, I'd say he's not fully cooperating or working with me to give me the information or quantity of information I need for the type of request that he's making. Now, does this mean there's anything untruthful about what he has said? No. His plans are to go out with friends and be back later. Those things are all true as far as we know. It's just that there's not sufficient detail for me to feel satisfied with his answers given his request. Sometimes you'll see this in job interviews. An applicant just doesn't have enough to say about an important question, and that may raise some red flags. On the other side of the coin, people will sometimes over-explain. They give too much information for the situation. This happened to me once during a job interview. We had about a dozen questions to ask the applicant and about 30 minutes to do it. And we asked the first question, and the applicant gave us a long-winded 10-minute answer. And it was just a warm-up question, really, about why they were interested in the position. A 10-minute answer was saying too much for what the situation called for. That violated the maxim of quantity because it was too much. And you could feel that in the room, it created a fairly demanding situation for me and the other interviewers because we had to do the rest of the interview in the limited time that remained. So it caused conversational difficulty. If I had to boil this maxim down into a concrete tip, I'd say to read the situation and give the amount of information that would satisfy the expectations. Don't make people pull information out of you, and don't dominate conversations by talking the whole time. Don't say too much or say too little. Give the expected amount of information. The second maxim is quality, and that means speaking truthfully. You'll often hear this explained as not lying or not saying what you know is false. It could also mean not making claims without adequate evidence or stretching the point beyond what the evidence would support. When I was young, I went to high school with somebody who was always making up stories that usually involved famous people that he knew. So I grew up in a really small town, and there's just no way that this kid knew Michael Jackson or hung out with the band members from Guns N' Roses. We all knew these were not true, in part because it just didn't make sense. But also, he never had any evidence. This was before social media, but people still had cameras and took pictures and got autographs. But he never had any evidence to support or back up what he was saying. Now, I think he just wanted to feel special, but nobody believed him. But thankfully, he stopped telling stories like this over time. And this example is a pretty harmless one, but in professional situations, speaking truthfully is really important. In my experience, any time people can tell that somebody's not being honest, it causes a lot of tension in the conversation and in the relationships. I know somebody who was once almost not hired, in part because they said something during an interview, something really small that someone knew was not true. And in the scheme of things, what they said was an unimportant piece of information, but because one of us knew it wasn't true, it really jammed the person's interview up. It was hard to get past. The point is, to cooperate in having an effective conversation, both sides have to communicate truthfully. Both sides have to have a conversation that's based in truth and reality. The tip for this is obvious. Speak truthfully and don't stretch the truth, exaggerate, or make claims you cannot support with evidence. The third maxim is relevance, sometimes called relation. This means that the information that comes out has to be relevant to the current conversation. And like the other maxims, we hardly notice when people are saying things that are relevant, but you'll notice this when people go off on tangents and what they say doesn't clearly connect or relate to the rest of the conversation. That's why they sometimes call it relation. Our talking turns should relate to or be relevant to what's been said so far. You'll notice this when people have a bad habit of changing the subject. This becomes really obvious if the person in a conversation asks a question, but the other person gives an answer that's not relevant. You've probably seen this happen, and it makes people uncomfortable. They're not sure how to handle the interaction. What do you say? Do you confront the person and say, that's not what I asked you? It can make things really awkward. You'll also see relevance become an issue when somebody's comment almost relates, but some of the dots are not connected. So if you said to somebody, I'm going to the store to buy a winter coat, do you want to come? But the other person replies,
winter. Like they say on the Game of Thrones, nothing burns like the cold.
That comment's almost relevant. We both said the word winter, but I'm still not sure if you're coming to the store with me or not, because the rest of what you said doesn't relate. Now, having said that, most conversations do change topics a few times during the normal course of an interaction. But when it happens suddenly or unexpectedly, that's when we notice the maxim of relevance has been violated. Given that, my tip for this in general is to stick to the current topic. Resist the temptation to go on tangents or quickly pivot on the subject. Stay on the conversation's current course until it seems that both people are ready to move on. And fourth, manner. This last maxim is a little different. Paul Grice might say the first three maxims are about what you say, and the fourth one, manner, is about how you say it. So it can be summed up as communicate clearly. So let's get right to the tip on this one. You can communicate clearly by practicing a few related habits. Say things in a concrete, specific way as opposed to being vague or ambiguous. Use words and expressions that your listeners are likely to understand. And talk in an orderly way that's easy to follow instead of being disorganized. So use these four maxims as a checklist. Are there any of these that you struggle with when you are in a conversation? Or do you know anyone in your everyday life who struggles with any of these four norms? As mentioned, when things are going well in a conversation, we hardly notice that these maxims are operating. Typically, it's when somebody does not fulfill these expectations that something feels off, and then you have to manage that conversational difficulty as a result. As mentioned, feel free to download that PDF of the 5 essential communication skills that all professionals should have. I'll put a link to that in the description below. But what do you think of these conversational maxims? I would love to hear your thoughts and your own self-assessment in the comments section below. I look forward to reading those comments and interacting with you down there. Until next time, thanks, God bless, and I will see you soon.